Admiral Kim Hyun felt the weight of humanity's future pressing down on his shoulders as he sat in the command chair of the Terran flagship Indomitable. The bridge hummed with quiet tension, officers moving with practiced efficiency while outside, the reinforced viewports. Earth hung like a blue jewel against the star-filled darkness. He had commanded this ship for 7 years, fought pirates and raiders across 3 star systems, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The holographic display flickered to life, casting an eerie blue glow across the darkened bridge. The transmission was coming through on all frequencies, broadcasted with enough power to reach every human settlement from Mars to the outer colonies. The message was simple and terrifying: surrender or die. Admiral, their fleet composition is impressive. Commander Park Yuna's voice carried a slight tremor as she read from the tactical station. Her fingers danced across the glowing controls, pulling up data streams that made Hyun's blood run cold. 200 dreadnoughts, each one capable of glassing a planet. Their smallest escorts are larger than our heaviest battleships. The numbers you scrolled past on the secondary displays. Ship after ship, each one a floating city of destruction. The Zephyrian Galactic Empire had arrived at the edge of human space with enough firepower to turn every human world into molten slag. Hyun watched the sensor readings update in real time as more ships dropped out of hyperspace, their massive forms blotting out distant stars. "Sir, we're also detecting battle carriers," reported Lieutenant Choi Jae-won from the sensor station. "Each one is launching fighter squadrons. Conservative estimate puts their small craft at over 10,000 units. Hyun nodded grimly and pulled up the Empire's military records on his personal display. The files made for sobering reading. 847 conquered species, 3,000 years of unbroken expansion across the galaxy. Every spacefaring civilization that had stood against them had been crushed, their worlds turned into tribute-paying vassals or glass-covered graveyards. The tactical data was even worse. Imperial plasma cannons could vaporize asteroids the size of city blocks. Their void shields deflected any energy weapon known to galactic civilization. Standard doctrine for the Empire was simple: arrive with overwhelming force, demand surrender, and if refused, demonstrate their power by destroying a moon or minor planet. Most species surrendered after that demonstration. "Admiral, incoming priority transmission," announced Communications Officer Song Hana. "It's from the Imperial flagship. They're requesting direct contact with our commanding officer." "Put it through to the main screen," Hyun ordered, straightening in his chair. Around the bridge, his officers turned to watch as the holographic display shifted to show an alien figure that belonged in humanity's worst nightmares. High Commander Velthar was a creature of sharp angles and predatory grace. His forearms were crossed in obvious contempt, each one ending in claws that could probably tear through steel. His skin was a mottled grey-green that seemed to shift in the artificial lighting, and his eyes glowed with an inner fire that spoke of countless worlds burned in his name. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship stretched away into darkness, filled with alien crew members working at stations that pulsed with sickly bioluminescent light. "So these are the humans," Velthar's voice carried an electronic translation, but the contempt needed no interpretation. "I have reviewed your primitive technology. Your kinetic weapons are obsolete, human. Your chemical rockets are toys compared to our hyperdrive systems. Your energy output barely registers on our sensors." The alien commander gestured with one of his arms, and data streams appeared in the air around him. Hyun recognized the technical specifications of human ships, weapon systems, and defensive capabilities. The Empire had been watching them, studying their capabilities, and finding them laughably inadequate. "You have 72 of your time units to surrender all human colonies and outposts," Velthar continued. "Your species will be permitted to exist as a servant class, working in our mining operations and manufacturing facilities. This is more mercy than most species receive. Refuse, and we will demonstrate why 847 civilizations chose wisdom over destruction." Admiral Hyun leaned forward in his chair, his voice calm and measured despite the racing of his heart. Every word he spoke now would be recorded, transmitted across human space, and potentially become humanity's epitaph. "High Commander, we're transmitting coordinates for a safe retreat vector back to your territory. Leave now, and no one has to die today." The sound that came from Velthar might have been laughter, but it resembled more the screech of metal against metal. Several of his bridge crew joined in, creating a chorus of alien amusement that made Hyun's skin crawl. "You warn us?" Velthar's glowing eyes seemed to bore through the transmission directly into Hyun's soul. "Primitive mammals giving threats to the masters of the galaxy? Your largest warship would serve as a maintenance pod on one of our dreadnoughts. Your most powerful weapons would barely scratch our shields." The bridge of the Indomitable fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Hyun could feel the eyes of his crew upon him, waiting for his response. In the distance, alarms were beginning to sound as human colonies across dozens of star systems received the Empire's ultimatum. "It's not a threat, High Commander," Hyun replied quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Velthar's mocking expression falter slightly. "It's a courtesy. We tried to warn you." He paused, letting the words hang in the space between their ships, between their species, between war and annihilation. "You should have run." The Imperial Armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a storm cloud blotting out the stars. 200 massive dreadnoughts materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the deadly beauty of weapons designed to end civilizations. Each ship stretched over 3 kilometers in length, bristling with plasma cannon arrays that could turn mountains into vapor. Behind them came the escorts and carriers, thousands of smaller vessels that still dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. High Commander Velthar stood on the bridge of his flagship Worldbreaker, 4 arms clasped behind his back as he surveyed the system before him. His tactical displays showed the familiar sight of human space stretched out like a map of conquest. The inner planets glowed softly on his screens, their orbital stations and defense platforms clearly visible to his advanced sensors. But something was wrong. "Where are they hiding?" Velthar demanded, his voice carrying the edge of a predator denied its expected prey. His tactical officer, a 6-limbed creature from the recently conquered Zelthari system, hunched over his instruments with obvious confusion. "Sensors detect no major power signatures, Commander," the officer reported, his translator struggling with the alien's nervous chittering. "We should be seeing their battle fleet by now. Standard doctrine calls for defenders to mass their forces at the system's edge, yet we detect nothing larger than orbital monitoring stations." Velthar's eyes narrowed to glowing slits. In 3,000 years of conquest, every species had followed the same pattern. They gathered their largest ships, formed impressive battle lines, and died heroically in conventional fleet engagements. It was almost ritualistic in its predictability. "Perhaps they fled," suggested another bridge officer, a floating jellyfish-like creature whose tentacles danced nervously in the recycled atmosphere. Some species choose exile over extinction, but even as the Imperial fleet advanced deeper into the system, their sensors painted a picture that made no tactical sense. Earth's orbital defenses were still active. The Mars colonies showed normal energy signatures. The asteroid mining stations were operating normally. Everything suggested a civilization going about its daily business, not a species preparing for its final battle. 300 million kilometers away, hidden in the shadow of Europa's ice fields, Captain Lee Minho felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched the Imperial advance through passive sensors. His ship, the stealth frigate Ghost, drifted silent and cold among the chunks of frozen water that orbited Jupiter. For 2 weeks, he and his crew had waited in this frozen tomb, their ship powered down to barely above death itself. The Ghost was a marvel of human engineering, born from centuries of hiding from each other. No other species in the galaxy had needed to develop stealth technology to this degree, because no other species had spent millennia hunting their own kind. The ship's hull was coated with materials that absorbed sensor waves instead of reflecting them. Its reactor ran at minimal power, barely enough to keep 30 souls alive in the cold darkness of space. "Captain," whispered Communications Officer Song Hana, her breath visible in the frigid air of the bridge. "Imperial fleet has passed the outer marker. They're fully committed to the system." Minho nodded, his eyes never leaving the tactical display that showed hundreds of Imperial ships streaming past Jupiter's orbit. Each one was a giant compared to his small frigate, but giants could be brought down if you knew where to strike. "Signal the fleet," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Even in the tomb-quiet bridge. Execute Phantom Protocol." The message went out through quantum-encrypted channels that the Empire's sensors couldn't detect or intercept. Across the solar system, from the asteroid belt to the edges of Pluto's orbit, humanity's true defense began to reveal itself. Not the massive dreadnoughts the Empire expected, but something far more dangerous. Behind Ceres, the largest asteroid in the belt, Captain Park Seonghwa felt his ship, Shadowhawk, come alive as power flowed back into her systems. For 3 weeks, his crew had survived on emergency rations and recycled air, their ship hidden among the tumbling rocks like a predator in tall grass. Around him, dozens of other ships were awakening from their cold sleep, small frigates and destroyers that had been drifting dark and silent while their crews waited for this moment. In the rings of Saturn, Commander Kim Nyan's torpedo boat, Viper, emerged from behind a chunk of ice the size of a city block. Her vessel was no larger than an Imperial shuttle, but packed with enough firepower to cripple a cruiser. She had chosen this hiding spot weeks ago, calculating the exact trajectory that would let her approach the Imperial fleet undetected. Near Mars, Lieutenant Commander Oh Chan-woo's heavy frigate Predator separated from a mining platform where it had been disguised as another piece of industrial equipment. His crew had spent a month living among the miners, pretending to be another cargo hauler, while their ship's weapons systems were carefully hidden beneath false hull plating. The beauty of humanity's plan was its simplicity. While the Empire's sensors were designed to detect the massive energy signatures of conventional warships, they couldn't see ships that weren't broadcasting power signatures at all. Every species the Empire had conquered fought like the Empire itself, with massive ships radiating energy like beacons in the night. Humans had learned to fight in the shadows. From his command post buried beneath Luna's surface, Admiral Kim Hyun watched as hundreds of small ships began moving through the solar system like schools of sharks converging on unsuspecting prey. Each vessel was a masterpiece of stealth technology and concentrated firepower, crewed by men and women who had volunteered to spend weeks drifting in cold storage for this moment. The Empire's sensors registered nothing until it was far too late. "Lieutenant." "Commander." Choi Ji-won gripped the controls of her torpedo boat Stinger as she weaved through the massive Imperial formation like a minnow swimming between whales. Her tiny vessel, barely 60 meters long, looked like an insect compared to the kilometer-long dreadnoughts that surrounded her. But appearances could be deadly. "Thermal signature is holding steady," reported her navigator Ensign Park Ji-hyo from the cramped station behind her. "They still can't see us through their own engine wash." Ji-won smiled grimly as she piloted her ship through the exhaust trail of an Imperial heavy cruiser. The alien vessel's massive engines created a cloud of superheated particles that masked her approach perfectly. It was a trick human pilots had learned fighting each other in the asteroid fields, using larger ships' blind spots against them. "There," she whispered, spotting her target through the chaos of the Imperial formation. The enemy command ship, Eternal. Dominion hung in space like a metallic mountain, its hull bristling with weapon systems that could level cities. But Ji-won had studied the technical specifications her intelligence teams had gathered. She knew exactly where to hurt it. "Targeting their command ship's reactor cooling system," she reported to her gunner, Sergeant Kim Tae-hyun, who was squeezed into the weapons station barely 2 meters away. In a vessel this small, every cubic meter counted. Tae-hyun's fingers danced over his targeting computer, painting a precise mark on the enemy ship's hull. "I've got it. Reactor cooling intake portside. One shot should cause a cascade failure in their primary power systems." Railgun locked, firing. The torpedo boat shuddered as its primary weapon discharged. The tungsten rod, no bigger than a telephone pole but accelerated to 15% of light speed, streaked across the gap between ships in the blink of an eye. The projectile carried more kinetic energy than a nuclear warhead, compressed into a needle-thin point that could punch through solid metal like paper. The Imperial ship's energy shields, designed to deflect the plasma bolts and laser beams used by every other species in the galaxy, offered no resistance to the physical projectile. The tungsten rod passed through the shimmering defensive barrier as if it didn't exist, slamming into the alien vessel's hull with devastating effect. "Direct hit," Taehyun shouted as alarms began wailing aboard the Imperial command ship. "There! Reactor is going into emergency shutdown." Across the massive Imperial formation, similar scenes were playing out as hundreds of human ships revealed themselves from their hiding places. Captain Lee Soo-young's fighter, Wasp, dove through a formation of alien escorts, her craft spinning and tumbling in patterns that defied every principle of space combat the Empire knew. "Missile lock!" her wingman, Lieutenant Yoon Jong-han, called out as enemy fighters swarmed toward them. "They're trying to bracket us with plasma fire." "Too slow," Soo-young laughed, throwing her fighter into a barrel roll that would have been impossible for any other species pilots. Human fighters were built for atmospheric flight, designed by beings who had learned to fly in the chaotic environment of planetary skies. In the vacuum of space, this gave them an impossible advantage. She triggered her thrusters in a sequence that sent her fighter spinning through 3 dimensions at once, a maneuver called the drunken asteroid that had been developed by smugglers avoiding customs patrols. The Imperial pilots, trained in the orderly formations of traditional space combat, couldn't predict where she would be next. "Launching missiles," she announced, releasing a spread of nuclear-tipped warheads that immediately began evasive maneuvers of their own. Unlike the guided missiles used by other species, these weapons were piloted by artificial intelligence systems that had learned from thousands of hours of human combat footage. The missiles streaked toward an Imperial battle carrier, their tiny thrusters firing in seemingly random patterns that made them impossible to intercept. The carrier's defensive systems, designed to shoot down the predictable trajectories of conventional weapons, couldn't lock onto targets that moved like living things. Meanwhile, Commander Kim Hyun-sik's heavy frigate Thunderbolt had positioned itself beneath an Imperial dreadnought, hiding in the massive ship's sensor shadow. His crew had been waiting for 20 minutes, using the alien vessel's own bulk to mask their approach. "Target their main weapon systems," he ordered his weapons officer. "I want those plasma cannons offline before they can return fire." The frigate's dorsal turrets swiveled upward, aiming at the dreadnought's belly from point-blank range. Instead of energy weapons, they fired solid projectiles, tungsten rods wrapped in shaped nuclear charges that would detonate after penetrating the target's hull. The explosions rippled along the Imperial ship's underside like firecrackers, each one severing power conduits and weapon systems. Within seconds, the mighty dreadnought was reduced to a floating hulk, its main batteries dark and useless. On the bridge of his flagship, High Commander Velthar watched his perfect formation dissolve into chaos as human ships appeared from impossible hiding places. His tactical displays showed dozens of his vessels taking damage from weapons that shouldn't exist. "Their weapons are primitive," he screamed at his tactical officer, his 4 arms gesturing wildly at the destruction surrounding them. "Kinetic, projectiles and chemical explosives. How are they penetrating our defenses?" The tactical officer's response was grim. His multiple eyes focused on readings that made no sense. "Sir, their projectile weapons aren't being deflected by our energy shields. Our barriers are designed to stop plasma and laser fire, not solid matter moving at relativistic speeds." "And their flight patterns," added the sensor operator, a crystalline being whose translated voice carried notes of panic. "They're not following any known tactical doctrine. Their ships move like atmospheric creatures. They're using combat maneuvers that shouldn't work in vacuum." Velthar's glowing eyes narrowed as he watched a human fighter perform an impossible corkscrew maneuver through his escort formation, launching missiles that moved with the unpredictability of living predators. Each human ship fought like a pack hunter, using coordination and cunning instead of raw firepower. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving damage reports from across the fleet. The humans aren't engaging us in direct battle. They're striking our weak points, our support systems, our blind spots. It's like they know exactly how our ships are built." And they did. While the Empire had been conquering species after species using the same tactics for 3 millennia, humanity had been studying those tactics, learning from the Empire's victories, and preparing for this exact moment. Every human pilot had memorized Imperial ship designs. Every gunner knew where to aim for maximum damage. Every captain understood that the key to victory wasn't matching the Empire's strength, but exploiting their weaknesses. The galaxy's greatest military force was learning a hard lesson. Sometimes the primitives bite back. Admiral Kim Hyun stood before the massive holographic display in the command center, buried 3 kilometers beneath Luna's scarred surface. The underground facility hummed with activity as hundreds of officers coordinated the most complex military operation in human history. Every screen showed a different piece of the puzzle: ship positions, weapon status, casualty reports, and tactical projections that updated every few seconds. The centerpiece was the master tactical display, a 3-dimensional map of the solar system that showed every ship in the battle as glowing dots of light. Blue for human vessels, red for Imperial forces. What made Hyun's chest swell with pride was watching how those blue dots moved, not as individual ships, but as a single living organism responding to threats with impossible coordination. "Admiral, we're maintaining quantum-encrypted communications with all active units," reported Communications Officer Song Hana from her station. "Zero transmission lag, zero intercepts. Every human ship is sharing targeting data and tactical adjustments in real time." This was humanity's secret weapon. Not any single piece of technology, but their ability to fight as one mind controlling thousands of bodies. Every pilot could see what every other pilot saw. Every gunner knew where every friendly ship was aiming. When one human ship discovered a weakness in Imperial armor, that information was instantly shared across the entire fleet. "Imperial forces are adapting to our stealth technology," Commander Park Yuna announced, her fingers dancing across her tactical interface. "They're switching to gravitational sensors now. Our ships are starting to show up on their screens." Hyun nodded calmly. They had expected this. No advantage lasted forever in combat, especially against an enemy that had conquered nearly 1,000 species. The key was staying ahead of their adaptations. "Signal all units," he ordered, his voice carrying across the command center. "Switch to Formation 7. Time for the swarm." The response was immediate. Across the battlefield, human tactics evolved in real time as ships received new orders and implemented them without question. Where before they had relied on stealth and surprise, now they would use their true advantage, the ability to fight like the pack hunters their ancestors had been. Captain Kim Woo-jin, commanding the destroyer Hurricane, received the formation change and immediately began releasing his cargo. His ship's belly opened like a flower, disgorging hundreds of autonomous drones that spread out in a glittering cloud of death. Each drone was no bigger than a refrigerator, but packed with enough explosives to damage a cruiser. "Drone swarm deployed," he reported to his weapons officer, Lieutenant Lee Cheung. "Programming them for independent target acquisition. Let's see how they handle 1,000 tiny targets instead of one big one." The drones moved with the erratic patterns of insects, swarming around Imperial ships in clouds that their defensive systems couldn't track. Each one was controlled by an artificial intelligence that had learned from millions of hours of combat simulations, programmed to find weak spots and exploit them without mercy. Meanwhile, Commander Oh Ji-hoon's fighter squadron found themselves facing an Imperial defensive screen, dozens of alien fighters arranged in a protective formation around their capital ships. The enemy pilots flew in perfect geometric patterns, just as their training manuals dictated. "They want to play formation flying," Ji-hoon said to his wingman, Captain Yu Jimin. "Let's show them how humans really fight." Instead of engaging the Imperial fighters in traditional dogfights, the human pilots did something unprecedented. They turned their fighters into guided missiles, packing their ships with antimatter charges and diving straight at the Imperial capital ships behind the defensive screen. "Ramming speed!" Ji-hoon shouted, his fighter accelerating toward a massive Imperial battle cruiser. At the last second, he ejected in an escape pod while his unmanned fighter continued its suicide run, slamming into the alien vessel's bridge section in a brilliant flash of annihilation. Across the battlefield, dozens of human pilots followed his example. The Imperial defensive screen found itself trying to intercept what amounted to piloted missiles, each one capable of independent thought and tactical adjustment right up until the moment of impact. But perhaps the most shocking moment came when Captain Oh Sung-min's heavy cruiser. Retribution found itself surrounded by 6 Imperial dreadnoughts. Each enemy ship was 3 times his size, bristling with enough firepower to vaporize his vessel in seconds. By every principle of space combat known to the galaxy, he should have surrendered or died heroically in a futile last stand. Instead, he did something that made the Imperial commanders question their understanding of physics itself. "All hands, prepare for modular separation," Sung-min announced to his crew. Switching to distributed combat mode. The Retribution began to come apart like a puzzle being disassembled, but this wasn't battle damage, it was design. The ship had been built in 12 separate modules that could operate independently when needed. Within seconds, what had been one heavy cruiser became 12 smaller vessels, each one carrying enough firepower to threaten a capital ship. "Scatter pattern Delta," Sung-min ordered from the command module. "Engage multiple targets simultaneously." The 12 pieces of his former ship spread out in 3 dimensions, attacking the Imperial dreadnoughts from angles they couldn't possibly cover. Their weapon systems, designed to track one large target, couldn't adjust fast enough to engage 12 smaller ones, moving in coordinated but unpredictable patterns. On the bridge of his flagship, High Commander Velthar watched his tactical displays with growing horror. "Impossible!" he snarled, his forearms gesturing wildly at screens that showed human ships performing maneuvers that violated every principle of space combat he had learned in 3 centuries of warfare. "Commander," his tactical officer reported, his voice trembling with confusion, "their ships are changing, separating into smaller units, combining with other vessels, releasing swarms of attack drones. It's like they're not individual ships at all, but parts of some larger organism." Velthar's glowing eyes narrowed as he watched a human formation execute a maneuver he had never seen before. Instead of maintaining rigid battle lines like every other species, they flowed like water around his ships, striking from unexpected angles with weapons that shouldn't exist. The truth was becoming clear, and it terrified him. Every species the Empire had conquered fought like the Empire itself, with massive ships, overwhelming firepower, and honorable tactics passed down through generations of military tradition. They fought with pride and dignity, following rules of engagement that made sense to civilized beings. Humans didn't fight like that. They fought like the apex predators they had evolved to be, using every dirty trick, every advantage, every weakness they could find. They had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing their own kind, and now they were applying those lessons against an enemy that had never faced anything like them. The galaxy's greatest military force was learning what it meant to fight humans, and the lesson was written in burning wreckage across the solar system. The Imperial retreat began exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes after the first shot was fired. What had started as the Empire's most routine conquest had become their greatest military disaster in 3,000 years of galactic domination. Across the solar system, the remnants of the once mighty armada limped toward the edge of human space, their hulls scarred and their formations shattered. High Commander Velthar clung to the command rail of his flagship Worldbreaker as emergency. Lighting cast eerie shadows across the smoke-filled bridge. Half his crew was dead. The other half struggled to keep basic systems online as atmosphere leaked from dozens of hull breaches. The ship that had once been the terror of 100 star systems now drifted powerless, its massive weapons dark. "Hand-useless damage report," he wheezed, his breathing labored, as the ship's failing life support struggled to process the toxic fumes from burning electronics. "Reactor offline, sir," reported his surviving tactical officer, a crystalline being, whose normally prismatic form was now cracked and dulled. "Main weapons destroyed. Navigation systems gone. We're running on emergency power only." Around them, the bridge crew worked frantically to maintain life support. The proud warriors of the Empire, beings who had never known defeat, now faced the reality of their own mortality. Emergency alarms wailed throughout the ship as automated systems failed one by one. Through the cracked viewports, Velthar could see the remains of his fleet. Of the 200 dreadnoughts that had entered this system with such confidence, fewer than 90 remained functional. The rest were either destroyed completely or drifting like tomb ships in the cold vacuum. The humans had done more than defeat them. They had humiliated the greatest military force the galaxy had ever known. "Sir," the communications officer called out, her tentacles trembling as she operated the partially damaged equipment. "The humans are transmitting on all frequencies. They're offering safe passage to any Imperial ship that surrenders." Velthar's four eyes blazed with the last of his warrior's pride. Even in defeat, the idea of surrendering to what he still considered primitive mammals filled him with rage. But as he looked around his dying bridge, at his wounded crew and failing systems, he realized he had one last duty to perform. "Open a channel to the human fleet," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Direct transmission to their command vessel." The holographic display flickered to life, showing Admiral Kim Hyun standing calmly in what appeared to be an underground command center. The human looked tired but alert, his uniform bearing the dust and sweat of a commander who had just fought. "For his species' survival." "How?" Velthar gasped, the word escaping his lips like a prayer to gods he no longer believed in. "How did primitives defeat the Empire? We had superior numbers, superior technology, superior firepower. Your weapons are centuries behind ours. Your ships are smaller, weaker, slower." Admiral Hyun's expression remained calm, but there was something in his eyes that made Velthar understand why his species had never been conquered. It was the look of a predator that had been hiding its true nature, waiting for the right moment to reveal its fangs. "High Commander," Hyun said, his voice carrying across space to reach not just Velthar but every Imperial communication network in the galaxy. "I'm going to answer your question, and I want every species under Imperial rule to hear this. The T." Human Admiral stepped closer to his transmission equipment, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a eulogy for an age that had just ended. "Every species you conquered lived in peace before you attacked them. They were philosophers, artists, traders, explorers. They built beautiful cities and created wonders of science and culture. When you came for them, they fought with honor, because that's all they knew." Velthar listened, his breathing becoming more labored as the ship's life support continued to fail around him. Other Imperial commanders across the system were hearing this too, their own damaged vessels picking up the transmission. "Humans have never known peace," Hyun continued, his words being broadcast to 1,000 worlds where subjugated species huddled in their homes, listening to news of the impossible. "We've been at war with each other for our entire history. 10,000 years of constant conflict, brother fighting brother, nation destroying nation. We've had millennia to perfect the art of killing our own kind." On the surface of Earth, millions of humans watched the transmission on public screens, seeing their leader explain to the galaxy why humanity had survived when so many others had fallen. In the asteroid belt, rescue ships moved between drifting Imperial hulks, offering aid to enemies who had come to exterminate them. "You studied species that fought with honor," Admiral Hyun's voice carried across the void, reaching slave worlds and Imperial outposts throughout the galaxy. Massive fleets engaging in formal battle lines, following ancient codes of warfare passed down through generations of civilized beings. "We learned from species that fought with cunning, with guerrilla warfare, with the desperate fury of cornered animals." The transmission paused as Hyun gestured to something off-screen. Behind him, tactical displays showed the final phases of the battle. Human ships moving like pack hunters, striking from shadows, using every dirty trick their violent history had taught them. "We warned you to run because we knew exactly what would happen when apex predators were threatened," Hyun said, his words carrying the weight of prophecy fulfilled. "You came here expecting to fight another peaceful civilization. Instead, you found the one species in the galaxy that has spent its entire existence learning how to kill efficiently." As the transmission ended, Velthar felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of conquest: genuine fear. Not just for his own life, but for the Empire itself. The humans hadn't just defeated them, they had revealed the Empire's fundamental weakness. For 3,000 years, they had conquered species that didn't really know how to fight. Now, the galaxy was watching footage of what happened when the Empire faced beings who had never known anything else. Within hours, the first rebellions began. On Centauri Prime, the crystalline inhabitants rose up against their imperial garrison, using tactics they had learned from intercepted human military broadcasts. On the water world of Aquatica, the dolphin-like natives began coordinating submarine attacks against imperial underwater bases. Across 100 systems, species that had been subjugated for generations suddenly remembered what freedom looked like. The human rescue ships that moved through the battlefield, collecting imperial survivors and offering medical aid to their enemies, carried more than supplies. They carried hope to every enslaved world that watched their broadcasts. The message was clear. The Empire could be beaten. High Commander Velthar died 2 hours later when his flagship's life support finally failed completely, but not before he had transmitted one last message to Imperial Command. 3 words that would haunt the Empire's remaining leadership. They warned us. The Zephyrian Galactic Empire had ruled for 3 millennia, conquering nearly 1,000 species and spreading its influence across 3 galactic arms. It would not see a 4th millennium. The age of human expansion was about to begin, but unlike the Empire, humanity would offer partnership instead of slavery to those who chose to join them. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Never threaten a species that had spent 10,000 years learning how to survive by any means necessary. The end.